It begins in silence, files pulled from dusty cabinets, their covers stamped in fading red ink with the words "Most Secret" and "Eyes Only." Pages brittle with age whisper of wartime operations never admitted to the public, events that were deliberately concealed beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. These are not legends or battlefield rumors, but fragments of intelligence reports, survivor depositions, and intercepted communiques buried within the vaults of Allied and Axis archives. They speak of ships that vanished without torpedo strikes, of bunkers that swallowed entire convoys of men and machines, of experiments relocated under Soviet custody into the frozen wastes of Siberia, and of armored divisions that seemed to materialize and dissolve in the smoke of Kursk. Each case carries the same unmistakable weight. Something was witnessed, something was recorded, and then, at the highest levels of military intelligence, something was erased. The details lie not in the official histories, but in censored footnotes, unexplained gaps in convoy manifests, and intercepted messages marked as destroyed. The air of secrecy around these incidents suggests more than battlefield chaos. It suggests deliberate suppression, coordinated silence, and truths considered too destabilizing to release even decades later. What remains is a paper trail fractured by redactions, hinting at technologies and events incompatible with the accepted timeline of the war. Tonight, those hidden files are reopened. The voices of the missing, the silenced, and the erased will surface once more, drawn from the depths of sealed archives where they were meant to remain forgotten. This is the forbidden record of World War II's most cursed mysteries. Chapter 1. The Vanishing of Convoy HX-229. In March 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its darkest chapter. Britain's lifeline, its Atlantic convoys, was under constant siege by Admiral Karl Dönitz's U-boat wolfpacks. Convoy HX-229, sailing from New York to Liverpool, departed with 49 merchant ships under the protection of 5 Royal Navy and United States Navy escorts. The Admiralty logs list its cargo as standard wartime freight: foodstuffs, ammunition, industrial parts. But hidden within several vessels were consignments classified far above merchant manifests. Items marked only as strategic material, restricted clearance. By March 16, the convoy had entered mid-Atlantic waters known as the Black Pit, a deadly stretch beyond Allied air cover. It was here that the convoy was intercepted. Kriegsmarine records confirm 3 U-boat groups, codenamed Raubgraf, Stürmer, and Dränger, converged on HX-229 with devastating precision. Over 4 days, 22 merchant ships were sunk. Yet what has never been satisfactorily explained is the fate of 4 vessels: Belle Pamela, Skjelbred, Goyaz, and an unnamed freighter whose designation is missing entirely from surviving manifests. Survivor testimony, recorded in Admiralty File ADM 199-214, describes not torpedo strikes, but ships breaking apart as if crushed from within. Crewmen spoke of sudden implosions, metal screaming under unseen pressure, and in one case, a vessel disintegrating in a column of white light that left no wreckage floating on the waves. The escorts reported no confirmed U-boat contacts at the precise moments of these disappearances. German torpedo logs, later recovered from captured U-boat archives, also omit these sinkings. Instead, they reference phantom detonations in their after-action reports, incidents that even German captains could not attribute to their own weaponry. The intelligence trail deepens in decrypted Enigma intercepts. Bletchley Park's Hut 8 analysts flagged a series of messages sent between U-boat command and Berlin in March 1943. The decrypted fragments refer to unaccounted losses not of Kriegsmarine origin. Yet these translations were redacted in official summaries and withheld from public release until fragments emerged in the 1990s. Even more troubling are references in OSS archives, particularly file number X4537, in which American agents noted the sudden disappearance of entire cargo consignments aboard the lost freighters. Their contents were listed not as food or steel, but as classified equipment under diplomatic seal. The exact nature of this material remains unknown. Speculation points to advanced radar assemblies, early proximity fuses, or even enriched uranium shipments smuggled for Anglo-American atomic research. In Soviet archives, opened briefly after the fall of the USSR, naval intelligence files corroborate a different angle. One report, GRU Memorandum number 4417, describes Western experiments with magnetoacoustic resonance weapons tested on live convoys in March 1943. The language is chilling. Soviet analysts claimed the Allies may have deployed an experimental device intended to disable U-boats, but instead catastrophically affected their own vessels. If true, it would explain the Admiralty's decades-long effort to suppress the HX-229 anomalies. Witness depositions suggest survivors were warned never to speak publicly. Those who did were dismissed as confused by trauma or misled by battle stress. Yet the consistency of their accounts remains striking. The weather on those days was brutal. Heavy seas, freezing spray, and low cloud made visibility poor, but not so poor that men mistook torpedoes for something else. One Royal Navy escort officer, Lieutenant Commander James Fairchild, described in his after-action notes an explosion beneath Belle Pamela without preceding wake. No contact detected, no sonar confirmation. His report was filed, then vanished from Admiralty archives, until a heavily redacted copy resurfaced in 1974 under a Freedom of Information request. The missing sections contain multiple references to acoustic distortion and hull resonance beyond structural tolerance. Adding to the unease, post-war Allied salvage teams were dispatched to the coordinates where HX-229 ships were lost. Their logs, contained in Admiralty Salvage Division File 9B-223, record finding no wreckage at all, not even oil slicks, at the positions where the mysterious implosions were reported. For ships of thousands of tons, carrying steel, coal, and cargo, this is anomalous to the point of impossibility. Ships sunk by torpedoes always leave debris, lifeboats, and fuel. These 4 freighters simply disappeared into the Atlantic, as though swallowed whole. In the Cold War years, the case of HX-229 quietly resurfaced. Declassified CIA memoranda from the 1950s reveal an unusual exchange of documents between Langley and the Royal Navy regarding classified wartime disappearances. Soviet reconnaissance trawlers in the 1960s reportedly mapped zones of magnetic disturbance in precisely the region of the convoy's loss. Western scientists who later studied the area found irregularities in compass readings and unexplained sonar echoes, phenomena they attributed to anomalous subsea geology. Yet such explanations fail to account for the deliberate omission of convoy losses from official records, or why manifests of certain ships were erased entirely. Among merchant sailors, the story of HX-229 took on a whispered reputation. Survivors spoke in hushed tones of ships that went down without a fight. Families of missing crewmen received no full accounting, only standard condolence telegrams and vague explanations. For decades, historians described HX-229 merely as one of the largest convoy battles of the war, noting its heavy losses, but never addressing the unexplained disappearances. It was only in the 1990s, when fragments of Admiralty and OSS files were declassified, that hints of a deeper truth emerged. Even then, entire pages remain blacked out. Today, 80 years after the events, the coordinates of the missing vessels remain sealed by the British Ministry of Defence. Requests to access full HX-229 files are denied under Section 23 of the Freedom of Information Act, citing national security and intelligence matters. What possible relevance could 4 lost freighters have to modern national security? The answer may lie in the suspicion that the convoy carried not only supplies, but prototypes or raw materials vital to secret wartime projects. If those materials were lost, or if their disappearance was caused by an Allied experiment gone disastrously wrong, the embarrassment and strategic risk would explain decades of silence. For the families of those lost, the unanswered questions are unbearable. Why were no wrecks ever recovered? Why were survivors pressured into silence? Why do German and Allied records alike omit critical details? HX-229 was not merely another naval disaster. It was an event marked by redactions, vanishing documents, and whispered references to weapons that should not have existed in 1943. Its story survives only in fragments, brittle pages hidden in archives, survivor voices smothered by official denial, and coordinates erased from maps. Somewhere in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the truth remains, sealed beneath the waves as tightly as it was sealed in the vaults of intelligence agencies. The disappearance of HX-229 is more than a naval tragedy. It is a shadow over the history of the Second World War, one that suggests some battles were not fought only against the enemy, but against the boundaries of technology itself, and the silence imposed by those determined to keep the truth submerged. Chapter 2: The Sealed Bunkers of Riese. complex beneath the cold forests and jagged peaks of the Owl Mountains. In Lower Silesia lies one of the darkest enigmas of the Third Reich. Known as the Riese complex, German for giant, this vast subterranean network was carved into stone under the authority of the SS Construction Brigade and supervised by Organization TOT. Its purpose has never been fully explained. Some historians label it an unfinished headquarters for Adolf Hitler, others a last redoubt for the Reich leadership. Yet the surviving documents, the scattered testimonies of forced laborers, and the persistent veil of secrecy maintained even after the war suggest something far more disturbing. The complex was not a single bunker, but an interlinked labyrinth, stretching through 7 known sites: Osowka, Włodarz, Rzeczka, Jugowice, Sobon, Sokolec, and Kolcha, covering over 30 square kilometers. Officially, the project consumed enormous resources from 1943 to 1945, at a time when Germany was already collapsing under Allied bombing. What justified such investment in hidden tunnels when entire cities were in ruins? The answer lies in sealed files, missing archives, and the lingering radiation readings still detected around certain shafts. The construction was brutal. Thousands of forced laborers from Gross-Rosen concentration camp were marched into the mountains, working under SS Totenkopf guards. Their mortality rate was staggering, with estimates suggesting 10,000 deaths across the project. Survivors spoke of impossible shifts, starvation, and labor conducted under constant fear. Yet the accounts of those few who escaped describe not just tunnels and chambers, but vast concrete halls with reinforced vaults and wiring conduits, as though intended for machinery rather than command posts. One Polish survivor, interrogated by the Soviets in 1946, described giant cylindrical chambers with steel rings embedded into the walls, a detail strikingly consistent with reports of test facilities rather than living quarters. The documentation trail is fragmented. Reich Main Security Office file WVHA 3278, partially recovered after the war, lists Riese under the category Sonderbauvorhaben, Special Construction Project. Notably, its budget line was managed directly by Heinrich Himmler's SS rather than the Wehrmacht. Declassified Allied intelligence reports from 1945 identified at least 2 hidden shafts never catalogued on German maps. One was sealed by explosive charges during retreat. The other collapsed under unexplained circumstances. In both cases, Allied engineers were ordered to halt excavation after only superficial surveys. The reason, cited in a 1946 British intelligence memo, was unacceptable hazard, possibly chemical or radiological. Such wording was highly unusual for immediate post-war evaluations. Speculation intensified with the discovery of scattered documents linking Riese to the Uran project, the German nuclear energy program. Although conventional history claims Germany never came close to a functional atomic weapon, surviving fragments from Reich Ministry for Armaments archives suggest otherwise. A shipment of uranium oxide from Belgium, seized in 1944, disappeared en route to Berlin. Soviet Smersh archives, opened briefly in the 1990s, reference intelligence intercepts noting its diversion to Lower Silesia. If true, this would place critical atomic material inside the Riese complex during the war's final months. Witness accounts describe convoys of sealed trucks, escorted by SS men, disappearing into tunnels near Włodarz in January 1945, never to re-emerge. When Soviet forces captured the Owl Mountains in May 1945, they conducted a thorough yet selective inspection. Reports filed by the First Ukrainian Front, Document 4 SM72, confirm the seizure of technical equipment of high classification from the tunnels, yet large sections of the complex were left sealed. Polish authorities later attempted to excavate, but by the early 1950s, Warsaw imposed restrictions, declaring several shafts dangerous and unstable. During the Cold War, NATO aerial reconnaissance repeatedly photographed anomalies over the region, discolorations in forest canopy, unexplained subsidence, and localized radiation spikes. American intelligence compiled these findings under Project Blue Note, yet the files remain heavily redacted. The question arises, what lay within Riese that both NATO and the Warsaw Pact chose not to expose? The Riese mystery deepens with the testimony of engineers. A German prisoner of war, interrogated by the British in 1946, described a project codenamed Sonnenrad, the Black Sun. According to his testimony, the complex was designed to house experimental energy devices intended to power advanced weaponry. His words were dismissed at the time as fanciful, yet they align disturbingly with the physical layout of certain tunnels. Large cylindrical halls, concrete foundations reinforced to withstand vibration, and ventilation shafts too large for mere personnel usage. Polish surveys conducted in the 1970s confirmed that many chambers were flooded deliberately, possibly to conceal what remained inside. What haunts the Riese complex is not only its unfinished state, but the silence that has followed it. Polish Institute of National Remembrance files confirm that requests to fully excavate Riese were repeatedly denied, often with no explanation. Even after the Cold War, when archives opened across Europe, the Riese project remained locked behind bureaucratic barriers. Officially, the tunnels were abandoned relics of a collapsing Reich. Unofficially, researchers who entered illegally have reported Geiger counter anomalies, unexplained electromagnetic interference, and even the discovery of machinery fragments with no known design origin. These accounts, though unverified, match too closely with wartime testimonies to be ignored. The tragedy of Riese is written in the graves of those who built it. Forced laborers, many from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, died in staggering numbers, their bodies buried in mass pits that remain unmarked. Their voices echo through scattered testimonies preserved in Soviet interrogation records and Polish underground reports. They speak of construction that continued even as the front collapsed, of SS officers driving men deeper into unfinished chambers, and of equipment whose purpose they did not understand. For them, Riese was not a fortress. It was a tomb, carved in stone and sealed by secrecy. To this day, large portions of the complex remain off-limits. Local legends speak of tunnels that extend far deeper than the maps suggest, of entire underground railways hidden beneath collapsed rock. Some historians argue that Riese was intended as nothing more than a headquarters for Hitler. Yet this theory fails to explain the scale, the secrecy, and the technical features inconsistent with living quarters. Others point to evidence of advanced research, from jet propulsion experiments to nuclear material storage. Whatever the truth, it lies behind sealed concrete, in shafts deliberately collapsed by retreating SS troops, and in archives still classified by both Polish and Western authorities. The sealed bunkers of the Riese complex are not simply ruins of war. They are reminders of a project whose scope exceeded logic, whose purpose defied easy explanation, and whose legacy continues to radiate unease decades later. They stand as cold monuments to forced labor, hidden technology, and silence maintained by those who inherited the Reich's unfinished secrets. The truth of Riese remains buried, in stone, in archives, and in the memory of those who never returned from its depths. And until those tunnels are fully opened, the mystery will remain, echoing like footsteps through an abandoned shaft. What did the Reich build in the heart of those mountains, and why has the world been denied its answer? Chapter 3. Operation Harbinger in the Siberian wastes. The war had ended in Europe, yet the machinery of secrecy did not pause. In the late months of 1945, while the world celebrated the unconditional surrender of the Reich, Soviet intelligence carried out a transfer cloaked in silence. A select group of German scientists, seized in Saxony and Lower Silesia, were placed under NKVD custody and transported not to Moscow, but northward, into the barren wilderness of Novaya Zemlya. Their destination bore a codename whispered only in Kremlin memoranda, Operation Harbinger. The Soviets had captured fragments of Germany's most obscure research, the experiments of Die Glocke, the so-called Bell, a project left unfinished in the tunnels of Lower Silesia. What the Reich had failed to complete, Stalin now intended to harness, hidden beneath the veil of Arctic night. For the German scientists, captivity meant a continuation of their work under the eyes of their new masters. And for the Soviet state, it meant pushing science beyond the known thresholds of physics. The Siberian wastes were chosen deliberately. Novaya Zemlya was remote, inhospitable, and largely uninhabited except for small fishing villages and reindeer herders. Soviet engineers arrived first, erecting concrete bunkers, scaffolding, and massive rings of reinforced steel sunk into permafrost. Declassified fragments from Kremlin archives, stamped "Eyes Only, Presidium," confirm that the NKVD oversaw construction with brutal efficiency. Whole villages were evacuated. Their inhabitants vanished from census rolls. Some were relocated without record, others disappeared entirely, their absence explained as war relocation. By 1947, satellite imagery was decades away, and the Arctic was a blind spot in Western reconnaissance. It was here, far from foreign eyes, that Harbinger began. The testimonies that survive come not from official Soviet files, many of which were destroyed in Beria's purges, but from defectors, intercepted communications, and scattered CIA reports compiled during the early Cold War. One such account, declassified under CIA file H-Linguel 1132, came from a German engineer who escaped into Finland in 1951. His description was chilling. He spoke of colossal ring structures constructed near the Matochkin Strait, each lined with copper and tungsten coils. Within these rings, devices were placed that resembled the descriptions of Die Glock seized in Silesia. Bell-shaped apparatuses encased in steel, filled with a mercury-like substance referred to cryptically as Zerum 525. When activated, the rings emitted a low hum, and the surrounding air shimmered as though heat distorted it, despite the sub-zero temperatures of the Arctic. What precisely these experiments attempted remains disputed. Some records suggest attempts at field propulsion, an effort to create a weapon that could disable electronics or even bend gravity itself. Others point to radiation measurements logged during Harbinger operations, levels far exceeding those of ordinary nuclear tests. In several CIA summaries, reconnaissance pilots flying near Novaya Zemlya in the late 1940s reported unusual electromagnetic bursts that disrupted their instruments. These bursts coincided with seismic tremors recorded as far south as Archangel and Murmansk, tremors unaccompanied by natural earthquakes. The official Soviet explanation was subterranean munitions testing, but Western analysts were unconvinced. The cost in human lives was immense. German scientists were expendable assets, forced to work under NKVD surveillance, often without proper protective equipment. Soviet engineers tasked with assembly suffered burns, radiation sickness, and unexplained neurological symptoms. A 1948 internal memorandum, recovered in fragmentary form from the Russian State Archive, noted increasing psychological breakdown among personnel, accompanied by hallucinations and night terrors. Entire barracks were replaced after workers refused to re-enter the test chambers. Survivors spoke of hearing a deep mechanical resonance even when the machines were dormant, as though the earth itself retained a vibration long after the apparatus had been shut down. By 1952, the paper trail ends abruptly. Operation Harbinger disappears from Soviet files, replaced only by references to liquidated project assets. Many involved were purged, their names struck from personnel lists. One captured German scientist, interrogated by the CIA in 1961 after his defection in West Berlin, scribbled a final note in his deposition. It should have stayed buried in Lower Silesia. The interrogation record ends mid-sentence with no continuation in the transcript. Analysts noted the abrupt cessation as deliberate, suggesting censorship even within the CIA itself. What the scientist witnessed on Novaya Zemlya remains locked in that fragment. Meanwhile, the physical evidence persists. In the 1950s, when the Soviets began atmospheric nuclear tests in Novaya Zemlya, Western seismologists noted anomalies in the data. Some blasts registered magnitudes inconsistent with their declared yields, while others showed double pulse signatures, as though two distinct detonations occurred within milliseconds. Analysts speculated that nuclear devices were being used not solely as weapons, but as triggers for something else, an echo of Harbinger's earlier experiments. Today, in certain restricted zones of Novaya Zemlya, Russian geologists still record magnetic irregularities and residual radiation in patterns that do not match known nuclear test sites. The ground bears scars of colossal excavation, yet no maps or records acknowledge what was built there. For decades, Operation Harbinger remained a whispered rumor among intelligence circles, overshadowed by the overt arms race of the Cold War. Yet its shadow lingered. In 1987, when Glasnost briefly opened the Soviet archives, researchers stumbled upon memoranda referencing anomalous research projects of foreign origin conducted in the late 1940s. The files were quickly reclassified, access revoked. Western journalists who probed too closely were discouraged by sudden denials and lost documentation. The name Harbinger surfaced only in passing, attached to dates and places that matched known German transfers in 1945. It remains one of the least discussed yet most disturbing legacies of the Reich's captured. Science, an echo of experiments never meant to continue, carried into the Arctic wastes by a regime determined to master forces it barely understood. The Siberian wilderness keeps its secrets well. The wind howls across abandoned bunkers. Rusted steel rings half buried in ice, and shattered concrete shells crumbling under frost. Local fishermen speak of strange lights on the horizon, flares that appear without sound. Geiger counters tick erratically in places where nothing should remain. Yet the official stance of the Russian Federation is silence. Operation Harbinger is not listed in their records, and its survivors are long dead or silenced. The truth lies in fragments, smuggled documents, survivor testimonies, seismic charts, and whispers in interrogation files. Together, they form a mosaic of horror, suggesting that the Reich's most dangerous secret was not destroyed in 1945, but transplanted into Soviet hands, nurtured in the frozen north, and then erased by history's censors. What was born in the Owl Mountains of Silesia was not buried there. It was carried into the Arctic, reborn as Harbinger, and left to vanish beneath ice and denial. The consequences of that decision, scientists broken, villages erased, landscapes scarred, remain a silent wound in history. And though the documents end in 1952, the tremors, the radiation, and the silence suggest the project's legacy did not simply cease. It waits, buried in the wastes, as forgotten and as cursed as the Reich that conceived it. Chapter 4. The Ghost Division of Kursk Salient. The Battle of Kursk, fought in July 1943, remains the largest armored clash in history. A titanic confrontation where more than 6,000 tanks, 2,000 aircraft, and nearly 2 million men collided in the rolling steppe of Western Russia. The Red Army had fortified the salient with mines, trenches, and artillery in staggering density, determined to blunt Hitler's last great offensive in the east. German forces, including Army Group South under Field Marshal Erich von Manstein and Army Group Center under General Walter Model, launched Operation Citadel with the intent of encircling Soviet defenses. The outcome is known. The Wehrmacht bled out in the fields of Kursk, never again to seize the strategic initiative. Yet among the vast archives of Soviet intelligence lies a file marked with an anomaly that refuses explanation. Designated GRU 3417, it documents the appearance of a formation that did not exist, a phantom German armored division that struck, vanished, and left behind wreckage unlike anything recorded elsewhere in the war. On the night of July 11th, reports reached the Soviet 5th Guards tank army of a German thrust from the southwest, spearheaded by heavy armor bearing unfamiliar insignia. Survivor testimonies, later debriefed in Stavka interrogations, described tigers and panthers that carried a black sun emblem encircled by runic script. These markings were not associated with any known Wehrmacht or Waffen-SS unit, but resembled symbols linked to Himmler's SS Ahnenerbe, the occult research branch of the SS. Crews recalled being ambushed at night by tanks that moved with uncanny silence until they opened fire. Engines emitted a low mechanical whine, unlike the roar of standard Maybach power plants. Within minutes, entire Soviet platoons were annihilated. When reinforcements arrived, the attackers had vanished, leaving behind burning wrecks of Soviet armor and the stunned survivors of what they believed to be an apparition. Soviet intelligence tried to match the radio chatter intercepted. During the clash with known German formations, coded transmissions referred to Panzergruppe Eberhard, yet no such group existed in official German order of battle. Captured Wehrmacht officers interrogated after the battle denied any knowledge of the designation. One colonel, pressed during NKVD questioning, swore that no Panzergruppe by that name had ever been fielded. Yet the intercepts were real, logged by multiple Soviet listening stations. Even more baffling was the recovery of wrecked German tanks following the engagement. These were not illusions. They were physical machines, their hulls intact but devoid of serial numbers. Metallurgical analysis conducted in Moscow recorded that their armor was composed of an alloy inconsistent with known German production, harder than standard rolled homogeneous steel, yet strangely brittle under explosive impact. The enigma deepened after the war, when British intelligence stumbled upon references to the same division. A 1946 SIS memorandum, unearthed decades later, noted that German records captured at Flensburg listed unaccounted armored assets withdrawn from inventories in early 1943. No paper trail explained their reassignment. The file concluded with a chilling line: discrepancy may relate to experimental panzer formations under SS authority. Further, inquiry classified. This aligns with Soviet suspicions that the phantom Division was tied to Himmler's clandestine projects. The SS Ahnenerbe had long been rumored to explore unconventional technologies and esoteric symbolism, often dismissed by historians as mysticism without consequence. Yet the battlefield accounts from Kursk suggest a more tangible manifestation. Veterans who survived the encounter carried scars of confusion and dread. Some spoke of ghost tanks that materialized in fog, others of vehicles that seemed impervious to initial fire. NKVD transcripts reveal soldiers describing tanks that absorbed hits before erupting violently, as though their hulls stored the energy of incoming rounds until they failed catastrophically. These reports were quietly filed away, their witnesses warned never to discuss them outside debriefings. Official Soviet history omitted all mention of Panzergruppe Eberhardt, yet the silence itself became evidence of unease. The Ministry of Defense archived the wrecks in secret depots, accessible only to select researchers. In 1948, American intelligence sources reported that several of the anomalous hulls were transferred to Moscow's Kurchatov Institute for study. Their fate is unknown. The Germans themselves left almost nothing to explain the phenomenon. Post-war interrogations at Nuremberg elicited no admissions from high-ranking officers. Manstein, when pressed by Soviet prosecutors, dismissed the idea as fabrication, claiming no such division ever fought under his command. Model was dead, having taken his own life in 1945. Surviving Waffen-SS officers denied knowledge, though many were evasive when questioned about units detached from conventional command structures. It is plausible that a clandestine formation existed, created outside regular Wehrmacht oversight. If so, its existence would explain discrepancies in German tank production figures, which have long puzzled historians. Several hundred tanks listed as delivered in 1943 never appeared in documented formations. Where did they go? The mystery of the Kursk Ghost Division is compounded by the recovery of documents in Soviet archives during the 1960s. One file, heavily redacted, refers to field trial of advanced propulsion units attached to an unnamed panzer formation. Another references the deployment of symbol-marked experimental armor in combat conditions. These suggest that at least some in the Soviet command believed the division represented a test of experimental German technology under battlefield conditions. If true, then Kursk was not only a decisive clash of conventional armies, but also a proving ground for weapons shrouded in secrecy. Yet the Soviet files contain more than technical anomalies. They contain fear. Marginal notes from intelligence officers describe unease at the symbols painted on the tanks, the eerie silence of their engines, and the inexplicable disappearance of entire companies after engagements. One handwritten annotation, preserved in GRU 3417, reads, "These are not normal units. They vanish as if into the earth." Whether this referred to tactical withdrawal, destruction without trace, or something stranger cannot be determined. The fact remains, Soviet soldiers encountered an enemy formation that should not have existed, fought it, and left behind records that survived despite official denial. Today, the Kursk battlefield is silent. Fields once scarred by fire and steel now grow wheat under the Russian sun. Yet scattered beneath the soil, fragments remain. Shards of armor bearing no serials, alloys unmatched by any catalogue of wartime metallurgy. Local farmers occasionally unearth these relics, their discoveries quickly confiscated by authorities. Museums rarely display them, and when they do, their provenance is attributed simply to unknown German units. But the veterans remember. In their private memoirs, circulated outside official channels, they describe the night when tanks bearing the Black Sun struck like ghosts and disappeared before dawn. The Ghost Division of Kursk Salient is more than battlefield rumor. It is an anomaly recorded in official intercepts, confirmed by wreckage, and acknowledged in classified files across both East and West. Its existence raises questions about the nature of secret SS projects, the manipulation of production records, and the extent to which the Reich pursued unconventional technologies. Above all, it reveals the persistence of silence. For 80 years, the archives have withheld more than they have revealed. The division's true designation, purpose, and fate remain unknown. Yet its shadow lingers in history, a phantom formation that struck in the smoke of Kursk and left behind only wrecks that do not fit the war we thought we knew. In the fog of the Eastern Front, amid the roar of artillery and the clash of tanks, something moved that was not supposed to exist. And like all forbidden truths, it was buried, beneath rubble, beneath denial, beneath the silence of archives locked away. The Ghost Division remains a question without an answer, a file stamped classified that continues to haunt the greatest battle of the Second World War. The war left behind countless ruins, yet among them stand mysteries that refuse to rest in silence. The vanishing convoy in the Atlantic, sealed bunkers in the Owl Mountains, experiments exiled to the Siberian wastes, and a phantom division at Kursk. All are threads woven into a tapestry of omission, redaction, and denial. They remind us that history is not only what is written, but what is withheld. Each anomaly bears the fingerprints of intelligence agencies, sealed vaults, and destroyed files. Each story suggests that the Second World War was not merely a clash of armies, but also a shadow war waged in secrecy, where experiments and decisions crossed boundaries that official history could never admit. The questions remain unanswered. What cargo was erased from the convoy manifests of HX-229? What chambers lie sealed beneath Riese, their purpose entombed in stone? What experiments were conducted under Operation Harbinger before its trail vanished in 1952? And who commanded the ghost tanks of Kursk, a division that existed in signals, wreckage, and memory, but not in any order of battle? These are not footnotes of history. They are fractures in the narrative, glimpses of truths considered too destabilizing to release. As the decades pass, archives remain locked, coordinates remain classified, and survivors fade into silence. Yet the anomalies endure. They whisper through intercepted signals, censored testimonies, and missing cargo lists. They haunt the spaces where official accounts falter, and they demand recognition. Perhaps one day, the sealed files will be opened, and the world will confront what was hidden in the war's darkest shadows. Until then, these mysteries remain cursed relics, unresolved, unanswered, and forever chained to the silence of secrecy.